Welcome to the VIFF Podcast. My name is Curtis Woloschuck. I'm the Director of Programming at the Vancouver International Film Festival. This podcast was recorded on the unceded territories of the Musqueam, the Squamish, and the Tsleil-Waututh Nations. The VIFF Podcast is your chance to get the inside track from the people behind the films you love and the films that you've yet to discover. It's recorded during the annual Vancouver International Film Festival, which happens September 26th through October 6th this coming year, and also year-round at the VIFF Center. And these conversations take you behind the scenes with the creators bringing their work to the big screen. I'm very excited to be joined today by Mike Johnston. He's a director and producer here in Vancouver who has been involved with a number of films that have screened at VIFF in recent years, including last year's Wild Goat Surf, which had its world premiere at the festival. Mike, welcome to the VIFF podcast, first of all. I got to get these
Thank you.
out of the way. Really happy you could join us. I know you're a busy person. Glancing at your IMDb page, there are some pretty credits on there, and you are not a wizened old man. You've amassed a lot of work in a short period of time.
Yeah, it's been thank you first and foremost for having me, and thank you for those kind words, Curtis. It's been a very fruitful couple of years, and certainly I think, looking back on 2021, 2022 in terms of sort of growth for myself as a producer or just growth for our company in general, those were, big growth years. And then, as we know, these projects tend to take a little bit of time to get done and a little bit of time to get out. And luckily, I think, the last year has been great. We've had a lot of these projects sort of finally hitting those milestones of coming to like either being released in festivals or playing in theaters or VOD or what have you. So it's been very fruitful to see that, or it's been exciting, I should say, to see the fruits of the labors come to pass.
That's great. I think, going back a bit further than 21, 22, I was curious for yourself, everyone loves a good origin story. For yourself, what were like some of your earliest memories of either movie going or film watching? And was there, do you remember like the first film you saw? And then maybe the first film that got you excited about the possibility of making films?
Absolutely, yeah. So I mean, I think the two that I always sort of cite as earliest memories is my parents tell me, I think it was Sleeping Beauty. Disney's Sleeping Beauty was one that for whatever reason I was just captivated by. They tell the story that I was just captivated. They could just sort of plop me in front of the TV, and that was the movie that just sort of took all my attention. Then I think a little later in life, it was George of the Jungle with Brendan Fraser was a big one that got a lot of replays in my house. It was, I think, my grandfather always made the joke that we wore out the VHS tape on that one, which I think is true. In terms of the film that really, I think, sort of jump started it for me, it was Jaws. And I think anybody knows me, it's sort of a running joke of how much I love Jaws because and I could go on and on about that movie. I think there's so many things about why it was that film. I think it was unlike anything I had ever seen at the time, and of course way too young to be see. I think that always seems to be, to me, when I listen to other podcasts, is when people talk about Jaws, they were way too young to watch it. And I was like 10, way too young to watch it. But unlike anything I'd ever seen, I think the story of how it was made and how difficult it was to get made was so exciting to me. And then also, just like, to me, it's sort of a near perfect movie. Like, it has a little bit for everybody. It has family, it has comedy, it has levity, it has darkness, it has violence, and then the performance by all three men in the film is just so captivating. So to me, it's a near perfect film, and that's the one I always cite as that was sort of the moment that I was like, okay, I don't know what I want to do yet, but I want to do something in this business.
Yeah, back in those days when we could admire Richard Dreyfuss,
Yeah.
those were glorious times. It's funny. My first film I went to in theaters was The Jungle Book. So I applaud you for having a less problematic Disney film that was your touchstone. And then last November, my wife and I went to Tucson, Arizona, and there's a video store that has like a craft beer place next to it, and they show like a movie every night, and they had Jaws one night. We're like, we'll go and get some food and have a beer and watch Jaws. And they were on a good sized TV, but still a TV, and but a space where people were coming and going, and it's still just
Hmm.
captivating cinema because it is such the level of craft in it is so spectacular, and the storytelling mechanics of it, they're kind of the best in that they are seamless. It seems like almost effortless that you're not noticing all these pieces that are being set up to be paid off in the end as well. So it's a good choice, ultimately, I guess is what I'm saying here.
I'm glad to hear it. Yeah, because I mean, we could do a whole podcast on Jaws, I'm sure. Like even I just watched it on a plane recently on a screen that was way too tiny, not the way it was intended, but it was still, and even still discovering new things. I think that's exciting sort of when you have those favorite films, is there's things you don't pick up on, or there's new things that you do, or little things that make you laugh, or whatever it might be. And that's what I found upon watching it recently too.
I asked this question, knowing that you've directed work as well, that you're also a director. But so I preface it by saying that, and then thinking like, some kids may see Jaws, think about making a film, being behind the camera or maybe being in front of the camera. But when did the thoughts kind of first come to you, or your understanding of what being a producer entailed, and being kind of drawn into that aspect of the work? Was that
Mhm.
in an earlier age, or was it once you were in film school that you found yourself gravitating in that direction?
Yeah, I would say that was actually much later. I think it was when to your point, it was when I started in film school at the University of British Columbia. They had a small film program. There was only about 60 students per year. So 60 students altogether, but 20 students per year. Relatively small classroom. We had a very relatively small program. We had a very small building that was kind of off to the side and forgotten about. But it was sort of through that program we all had the opportunity to, of the 18 to 20 students in my class, we all had the opportunity to make films throughout that program. And certainly throughout the program, I was still very much focused on being a director in that sense. A lot of that coming from Jaws and other films I wanted to direct, but also with everybody having the opportunity to direct, is people needed producers. And I've always sort of felt that directors in a lot of ways do make good producers. I think, not to make this about Jaws again, but I think even Steven Spielberg said that Richard Zanuck was a director's producer because he understood that side of the brain so much. And I think to me, it was just like, if I know how to direct, I think I can produce in a lot of ways, at least at that level in film school, when obviously things are a little smaller, more tight knit. So I just ended up producing sort of for my classmates at that time, and that was more to, help them out, to help them, fulfill their films. It was not I'm going to do this sort of as a career thing at that point. And even, the first couple of years out of film school, which I think would have been 2018, 2019, I was still sort of had my head towards directing, but was producing for friends, producing for, this was pre Studio 104 as well, I should mention, producing for friends, producing for other collaborators. And I think it was sort of, middle of the pandemic, to be honest, that where I really started to make that switch to producing. And, part of those reasons was just, there's a lot of people, obviously there's a lot of people always trying to move into the film business. But I did find that there was sort of a shortage of, I'm going to say, career producers, people that were focused on producing. A lot of multi hyphenates out there: writer, director, producers, actors, what have you. But people that were really focused in the producing column, there wasn't a lot of them. And I've always tried to look at things too, of not what do I just want to do as a career, but what how can I benefit sort of the film ecosystem or the film business as a whole. And sort of looking at the greater picture, that's where I felt I could make a greater impact, was sort of as a producer, supporting projects, learning the business, taking them sort of from development to completion. And if there was an opportunity for me to continue directing projects when I could, that's great. But from a career perspective, I was trying to make that sort of that jump. And I think that was sort of it was when we were all sitting at home isolated in 2020, and we all had a lot of time to think. And that's that's sort of what I was thinking about. Is like, okay, when we do reemerge from this, what do I want those next steps to be? And that was sort of when I guess pulled the pin, so to speak, and started making that fulsome transition.
When you were first making that transition, was it a was there any challenge in terms of like parking some of your director instincts and like knowing how to give the directors you were working with space? And then I'm wondering, as your work in the space has evolved, do you have like kind of a standard approach to working with directors, or do you really tailor it to the directors you're collaborating with?
I mean, certainly, to answer the first part of your question, I mean, yes, I definitely had to park my own sort of director. I guess how I would look at projects as myself as a director, and sort of open it up to new experiences, new ideas, what have you. But that was what was also really exciting about it. Is as a director, you're kind of, you are, in a lot of ways, you have to be focused sort of on one goal, one vision. And for me, I think I've always sort of enjoyed the idea of having my hands in different pots to some degree, and working on multiple things. And when I was stepping into the producing column, that allowed me to sort of work with a wider array of people, like sticking with my close collaborators like Andy Alvarez, or Kayla, or some of these directors I've worked with over the years, but then also opening up collaborations with Caitlin Sponheimer and Asia Youngman, who are people who have become great collaborators over the years. So I think, while I've had to park those sort of director um thoughts or feelings I might have, it's also, I think, opened up a lot of possibility in that way. And also, I always try to approach projects with, how can I, how do I add to this? Not how do I deconstruct this and make it how I want to make it, but how do I add to this and add value, or add something to it that makes it a greater sum of its parts. So that's always how I try to approach any project I do. And to your point of the second question, I think I've always tried to, and I've mentioned this on panels and stuff like that in the past, is with some other producers I get asked a lot, is like, oh, what's your model? What's the model of how you do things?
Mm.
And my answer is always like, what's your financing model, or whatever it might be. And my answer is always, quite frankly, I don't have one. And I don't mean that to sound to sound like I don't know what I'm doing or something like that. But I just feel that every project needs its own sort of set of tools, and very rarely can I sort of tailor one to the other. I think there's ways you can do that if you're sort of if you're playing in one particular sandbox and making a certain type of film, and that's sort of your bread and butter. I think there are ways you can model that out. But certainly, with sort of the films we've tried to take on in our company, they are, a lot of times, big swings. They are usually, co-productions with other provinces or countries. It's really difficult to model those films out, in my experience. So I always believe in sort of, coming in fresh, and being like, okay, what set of tools do we throw at this one now? And everyone's a bit different. And I can certainly say, of the projects that I've been a part of, I haven't been able to sort of rinse and repeat, or use the same sort of thinking over again, because it just hasn't worked that way for the reasons of the project. And I don't like to sort of try and put creators in a box off the top. Like, we all know that it's like, I call it the come to Jesus moment. There's always a moment in production where you have that come to Jesus, where it's like, something's got to get cut or changed, or we got to do a dramatic fix here. But I don't like doing that off the top. I want people to have their vision, to write to that, or to create to that. And then, as we go on, if we have to make changes, we have to make changes. But I don't like, inhibiting that right away.
I'm a little bit curious about your arc, because you mentioned there's this which I agree with, this kind of identification of a lack of career producers in the region,
Hmm.
and then going to the point where you find yourself on panels, giving advice to other aspiring producers. Wondering were there like key mentors for yourself along the way in terms of giving you guidance in terms of how you start to build a practice and career as a producer in this region?
Certainly, yeah. There's been a variety of mentors over the years who have been, invaluable to me. I think, looking back, if I don't know if she'll like that I may name drop her, but I'm going to. Michelle Morris, who was a executive producer on one of the first films I did, The Beehive. She's been a great mentor to me over the years because she comes from quite a seasoned production background, sort of on the AD and production side, and now stepping on to the producing side. And all the way back to the Beehive days, where that was very much a trial by fire for me in a lot of ways. Like that was the first feature I did, so coming over from short films and being sort of dropped into, now you're the producer on a big feature film. What's that like? So she was a great sort of sounding board, and again continues to be a sounding board. Just we as because this is a especially right now, I think there's a changing of, not changing of the guard, but there's sort of a contraction and righting of the ship that's happening in the business as a whole. So having somebody like Michelle or others to sort of talk to from a business perspective too, because I think that's one thing that we sometimes forget is, the art and the creativity is so important, and ultimately what drives us. That's why I got into it. But there is a business proponent of this. After all, this is the film business that we're talking about, and so having people who are like in similar boats like that, running small companies or running companies of any size, and how they're dealing with the constant shifts, and what are we looking at ahead? What does 2025 look like? So having those mentors, not only in sort of a creative capacity, but in sort of more of a business, capacity is really helpful as well.
Your decision to start Studio 104 and have a production company in that space, were there other production companies you kind of looked at in terms of inspiration, if not modeling, or maybe how did there's the business of starting a company
Mhm.
like that, but maybe in the process of also instilling a philosophy in its foundation.
hmm Well, I mean, when we started the company, we founded Studio 104 in 2019. It was myself and three partners: Andy Alvarez, Diana Perry, and Martin Calvo, and all four of us went to UBC Film School together. And we actually, the origin of the name is that there were two rooms in our small building. There was room 2 and Studio 104, or room 104, I should say. And that room 104 is where we had all of our classes, where we met. So there's the genesis of the name, because everybody always sort of asks, "Is where did you come up with the name?" So I thought I'd put it out there publicly. But when we were starting, we were very focused on like our mission statement. We wanted to be, documentary and narrative focused. I think we looked at a lot of companies in the West that were commercial driven, or that were more in the service sector. Those weren't, and while those I think are great business models, it wasn't something that the four of us particularly had an interest in. So we decided, even if it takes a little bit more to build, we want to focus sort of on narrative and feature documentary. We wanted to make sure that was sort of a focus for us. And as silly as it might sound, a company that we actually sort of looked at a lot was Syncopy, which is of course Christopher Nolan and Emma Thomas's company. And not that we thought we were going to go out and make The Dark Knight or Inception. That was that wasn't it. But I think it was looking at their company in the sense of they're not empire builders, and that wasn't something we were necessarily trying to do. We weren't trying to build an empire with tons of divisions and overhead and staff and all these things. We wanted a small nimble company where we could focus our efforts on one, maybe two projects at once, give those projects all the love and support that they need, but not sort of not lose our heads too much, and not get caught up in, huge development slates and all that stuff that comes with it. So that was really why we looked at Syncopy, as just like, this is a small company that operates so well. Even if we're, many million dollars difference in the budgets that we get, I think the sort of mission statement is still the same, and that's what we've always tried to do. Even though we have, I think, expanded beyond that 1 to 2 films at a time sort of goal, we have grown above that, which is great. I think the mission is still the same. We put the love and care into all those projects equally, and I think the results. If speaking candidly, I think the results show, of some of the films that we've released and produced in the last 5 years now that the company's been open.
You mentioned the Beehive being your first foray into feature film production, producing, and I think it does get, or at least in my experience, a lot of people talk to directors about that transition from shorts to features. But from a producer standpoint, beyond obviously budget and shooting time, what were some key learnings for yourself, either on that first, I'm sure it goes on and on, but that first feature in terms of like what you need to bring to set, to prep, when undertaking a project that's just going to take months, if not years, to kind of see completion?
Yeah, I think the biggest sort of learning curve there was the financing end of it, and how complex the financing of those projects can become. Because a lot of times, coming over from short films, we were sort of one, maybe two sources of financing, and obviously quite low budget in those cases. But coming into a project like the Beehive, which was telefilm supported, and there were so many more levels to the financing in terms of what telefilm may have been providing, tax credits, broadcasters, and then fulfilling all of the responsibilities to those different stakeholders as well. I think that was a big learning curve. Like, now there's, many thousands of dollars, or even many more than that, on the line. And they're not just grants, right? They're investments, or they're, license fees, or, in some cases, people are pre-buying before knowing exactly what the final product's going to be. So I think it was just sort of that responsibility, and then the learning curve of the financing were the two biggest pieces. Otherwise, when it actually came to shooting the film, I almost found that it wasn't unlike, it was just more days than a short film. You just sort of had to have much longer stamina, and you had to, sort of take the challenges as they come, for a longer amount of time. But that was not unlike, many short films that we've done, where we shoot for 3 or 4 days, but now you're just shooting for 20 days, 5 days a week, or whatever it might be. So I think that was just had to really, enhance my stamina, and that was a good project to do that in. But otherwise, I think it was just the responsibility of having the financing, and how to manage that effectively was the biggest learning curve, and still continues to be, because as time has gone on, the financing projects has only become more complex and complicated. It has not gotten easier. So that's a constant sort of learning curve for me.
Whether it's learning curves or turning points, I'm wondering, of the 30-ish films you have on your CV now, was the Beehive kind of like maybe that turning point that you felt like kind of changed your career trajectory, or was it even like maybe a short film in there as well, where there was like a light bulb kind of aha moment that made you realize that this was the trajectory that things should take?
I think there was almost sort of the two sort of turning point films, I guess you could say, and the first of which I would say was a film called Laura, directed by Kayla Wachell, which I think screened at VIFF in 2020, if I'm not mistaken. But that was a turning point. That was a film we did with TELUS Story Hive, and that to me was really the first true film where I was the lead producer. I wasn't directing, or I didn't have another responsibility on the film. I was the lead producer, responsible for the budget, development, completion, all the way through. And that was still a short film, but I think that was, and even that was sort of prior to 2020 when I was sort of having those thoughts about of going full tilt into producing. But I think that sort of was one of the films that put me on the path to do that. Um, and then I think the second turning point was certainly the Beehive. Like having done that first narrative feature, that was a turning point of sort of turning that corner of, okay, now I've done longer form work. I've shown that I can, produce and deliver a project to major stakeholders such as, broadcasters, distributor, and telefilm. That sort of set things, I think, on the way to, things like Wild Goat Surf being possible, and some of these newer projects that we're developing and being in product or in our going into production for being possible as well. So I think those were sort of the two turning point moments.
I wanted to ask you as well, because you just mentioned Wild Goat Surf, and as mentioned earlier, that was a world premiere at VIFF.
Mhm.
Now you had Curl Power that just had its world premiere at Hot Docs, and Wild Goat Surf here at VIFF, significant representation from young cast as well. Caitlin directing her first feature film. Maybe the programmer responsible for the film, rocks up Rio for the Q&A at the end. But as a producer, what do those days kind of look like for yourself in terms of like hurting just the folks involved with them? Curl Power also features four young subjects,
Yeah,
4 or 5 young subjects of the film as well. So kind of like that, just making sure that everyone's where they need to be on the day to say their words before the film, take their bows afterwards, and then kind of managing the energy, managing the nerves for occasions like that as well.
absolutely. Well, I mean, it's all of the above of what you just mentioned is making sure everybody's in the right place at the right time. Certainly, Wild Goat Surf was a co-production between Quebec and BC, so we had a large representation of our cast and crew coming in from Quebec, making sure they knew where they were going in a new city. Luckily, I did have the assistance of a wonderful group of cast moms and dads. I shouldn't just say just moms, but parents that were very, very helpful in getting everybody to the right place when it came to our young cast. But then, yeah, and then it's just like letting the nerves sit in because especially that was our world premiere. I had seen the movie 100. Kate and I had seen the movie 100 times before, but it gets to a point where you're just sort of numb to it. You don't know if the jokes are going to land, you don't know if this beat's going to play, and all those things sort of start running in your head immediately before. And I know from experience of this many times now is like I certainly get the butterflies right before of like, and my head, for whatever, I always go to like sort of technical, is like, oh, what if it doesn't play, or what if it glitches? It's like not will people like it. For whatever reason, my head always goes to technical. um but sort of once the lights go down and the trailers or the ads are finished and you get that sort of first frame up on the screen, then I can kind of just let it wash over, let it wash out, and you can enjoy the rest of the experience. And I mean, in this case, Wild Goat Surf at the Rio, I think it was a fantastic venue for that film. And it was a great crowd. I think we were nearly sold out that opening night. It was a great crowd to see that film. And then when it screened again at the I think at International Village, it was another great screening, but a totally different crowd, an old sort of bit more of an older demographic for that matinee screening, but both reacted to it so strongly. So it's always that day is always a combination of nerves, making sure people are in the right place, have their tickets, all these things, and then you just get to sort of let it wash over you and do a great Q&A, and then hopefully an after party afterwards. So
you talked about this opportunity for reflection during lockdown and the pandemic, and making this decision to focus on producing for yourself, and having really kind of emerged from lockdown at a sprint, because there's been a lot of work you've been involved in since then. Um, how do you, but amidst this like kind of health or sorry, safety precautions put in place for productions initially, and then strikes to follow, the kind of contraction in the industry that's been there. And yet, for
Mhm.
myself, I feel like there's been a bit of really positive like building of community within the city as well, like a kind of galvanizing in the film community. And
Mhm.
maybe just from your standpoint, having made work in this region for some time and seeing how it's kind of taken shape the last few years, what is yeah, what is your kind of feeling on like the vital signs of the Vancouver film community at this stage and how it's kind of taking shape?
Yeah, I mean it's funny, like, you talk about reflection because, like, I've been doing a lot of that recently, but also it's just like when you look at our company, like, we started in 2019. Within a year there was a lockdown. Sort of took a couple years to fully emerge from that. 2022 we had a great year of growth for us. But then, 2023 sort of railroaded by dual strikes, and now sort of this contraction or course correction that's happening. And I think, I think as a producer you have to sort of be an optimist all the time, even if it's painful. um, but like I truly believe things will rebound. It's got to get. It's one of those things where it had to get a little worse before it got better, and I think that's sort of what's happening in terms of like sort of the state. Like I think Vancouver, or just British Columbia as a whole, is poised for a very successful rebound. And I think a lot of that is sort of what you were touching on, Curtis, is the strength of the community here. And that's something I've always really loved about Vancouver and about the Vancouver indie community, or just British Columbia as a whole, is that there is sort of this feeling of we're all in this together. And I don't, I obviously can't speak to any other provinces or things like that, but I really, we've got a lot of friends within the Vancouver film community who are going through the exact same thing. A lot of people in the same boat, so which I think helps. It doesn't, obviously it's not good for anybody, but it sort of makes the experience a bit more, you can tough it out a bit more, knowing that it's like, okay, it's not just us that are going through this. It's like this is being experienced by people far and wide. And there is going to be a point where we come out of this stronger, but it's just going to take a little bit of time. It needs a bit of a reset. And once things get back to that level, I think, I think we will rebound, and I think Vancouver will be strong for that, because there is a phenomenal amount of talent here, just in terms of writer, directors, producers, cinematographers. There's a ton of talent here, in the indie sector that sometimes goes unnoticed. And I think, once we are on that path for the rebound, I think similar to what happened after COVID, I think people are going to be rearing to go and rearing to show their talents, and things will only expand from there.
Well, if Wild Goat Surf gave you the chance to explore a BC Quebec co-production model, I know your next project, imminent, is going to give you the opportunity to wade into a British Columbia co-production,
Yes.
which is another hurdle for you to navigate. What in terms of an international co-production, like what does that, if you want to share some details on the project and maybe
Mhm.
just what new cans of worms does that open up for you in your capacity?
Absolutely, yeah. Well, so I mean, the film we're working on is called Memoria. It's written and directed by Andy Alvarez, who's a certainly a member of the Vancouver film community, and has been around, making great short films for a number of years. But this will be her first feature, and it's really a story inspired by true events, inspired her by her family's experience of, having to leave Colombia and come to Canada as refugees, and what that experience was like, and how it isn't a perfect ending. And not all things are blue skies when you arrive here, and what it meant for her family to sort of pack up and leave. And as you mentioned, it is a co-production with the country of Colombia, so it's international treaty co-production, which, yes, is a whole nother thing. I used to sort of say, yeah, like Wild Goat Surf, oh, that'll be a good, an interprovincial co-production. That's a good primer for an international co-production. And I think in some aspects that's true, but it is just a whole nother ball game, with a number of complications. And Colombia is an interesting region, which I've spent a lot of time learning about, and their sort of creative sector and their financial sector as well. So it's not a country that co-produces a lot with Canada, so we had that sort of challenge going for us. But at the same time, there's something exciting about, if we can pull this off, it's going to be really cool, for possible Canada Colombia relations going forward. So there is excitement and challenge in that, and I think it's one of those things where it's like, going back to what I was saying, is like, you can't put these sort of films in a model. Is like, everything has to be a little bit different. This has been an exciting challenge. It's been a difficult challenge. It's been almost 2 years of developing and pre-production to get us to this point now, where it's like, okay, now's the time to go. But I think it's going to be, I mean, certainly I'll have lots of stories by the end of this year of what that experience has been. But in terms of working with our Colombian partners, in terms of sort of the creative experience of casting and setting up down there, it's been nothing but fantastic so far. So by the end of this year, hopefully more exciting updates on that project, and hopefully within the next year or so, it's making its way out to the world as well.
Well, we will bring you back and have you tell the tales from the
Yes.
production. Mike, we really appreciate you joining us today, and best of luck with that project and all the other ones that are surely in the hopper for you.
Thanks so much, Curtis.